Hello, I'm Mark, and this is my channel, Several Books. I'm changing up the introduction to try to make something a little more personable, maybe. I figure what I'll do is I'll basically put what many people put at the end of the video at the beginning of the video, and that will work as my introduction. So if this is something that interests you, I'm going to take the time now to say I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. Of course, please feel free to watch the video. Otherwise, it's no big deal. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing a hat today, my hair is getting a little long. I don't like haircuts. This is the hat of a French band called L'Imperatrice. And they're kind of a disco sort of dance band. They've got a female lead singer, and I'm a huge fan of them. But this is basically typically what I wear. The hat makes me feel a little bit like I'm going to work outside, even though it doesn't quite fit on my head quite well with the hair. So it's been about 2 minutes and I've been talking about nothing. Let's get down to brass tacks. This video is going to be about a Egyptian novelist. Now, I know him from 13 different books in 2 languages. He writes in Egyptian Arabic, but you can get, I think it's 9 total that I have. So I think that's all of them. 9 books in English. And then his work also appears in France and in Francophone Africa, other countries where French language is spoken. I think that's because in Francophone Africa, there's a broader Muslim and Arabic-speaking community. So a lot of books that come out of that region are more likely to be translated in French. What I'm going to do is I've read 13 of this guy's books. That's all I can find across 2 languages. It does appear that he's probably written something like 20 books or more. I saw an interview at one point that said that he had done some like a children's book or 2, and that there's also a collection of short stories somewhere. Those things aren't available to me because I don't speak Egyptian Arabic. But you're probably wondering who this guy is, and the guy's name is Sonallah Ibrahim. And he is a Marxist, or he was. He died this year in mid-August, according to the internet. And I wish I had known that. I'm a big Ibrahim fan. You have to be to read all the books you can find by a guy. As I said, he was a Marxist, and I don't mean that in the sense like in the early part of the 20th century, there were several American writers who flirted with communism or Marxism. Among them would be Dashiell Hammett, Theodore Dreiser, Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck. I'm pretty sure Willa Cather was also in this group. A less known guy who was definitely on the left, actually dated Simone de Beauvoir, was Nelson Algren. If you get the chance to read some Nelson Algren, he's worth it based on his short stories. I haven't read any of his novels. But the thing that makes Ibrahim different is that he's pretty direct about his political leanings. And he does this through using a collage technique that I find incredibly interesting. As you know, I'm a Kathy Acker fan, and Kathy Acker's novels were often very elaborate and long collages. What Ibrahim typically does is he will have interspersed chapters where one chapter is the narrative of the story, and then there's another chapter that addresses kind of what's happening in Egypt and what's going on with Ibrahim. or not Ibrahim, excuse me, his main characters. Your next chapter will be newspaper clippings and newspaper headlines. It's not done slapdash. It's very well curated. He's not just mixing things up and putting them down. But you get these chapters that provide you kind of sometimes ironic but interesting backgrounds politically for what's happening to Egypt at the moment. Now, there are some good Ibrahim videos online. They tend not to have a lot of views. One of the books that I'm going to talk about is called Warda, and there is an interview with the translator. I'm going to see if I can locate that, but if you don't see it in the video right away on the description, just know I basically gave up finding it. If you do see it, I think it's like an hour-and-a-half long conversation discussing various types of Arabic literature and translation, but it's interesting. So Ibrahim, we know that I've said he's a Marxist. We know he uses a fairly experimental, although it doesn't necessarily get in your face the same way, a writer like Danilewski's House of Leaves is experimental. It's a little less in your face than that. Although I think, based on my limited experience with Danilewski, Ibrahim is probably more interesting to me. The other thing that he does that is very important to this discussion is that he's predominantly a writer of historical fiction. And I've for a long time thought that writers of historical fiction were sort of like the postmodern writers who kind of wanted to hide that they were, the geniuses that we often see of writers like Pynchon. They tend to hide behind history rather than, a huge, elaborate math and history and all this other stuff that you see in Pynchon and the verbiage. Volman, for example, is the same kind of way. So that is really important, because the question that I guess I want to convey here is, to what degree is it really possible to tell a historical fiction without bridging on left-leaning politics? I'm sure in the history of the world it's happened, and I'm not saying everybody who doesn't agree with those politics, if they want to write historical fiction, by all means. But after Georg Lukács, who was, I think he was Hungarian. I don't remember where Lukács. His name is spelled Lukacs. You might know him from the way that name looks, Lukács, but it's pronounced Lukács. And he has a theory of historical fiction, and he was a very well-known Western Marxist. If you look into the history of Marxism in the West around the turn of the 20th century, you get him. So I guess, like I said, where I want to steer this question is it possible to recount historical events, and I mean like on a grand scale, without kind of dipping into left-wing politics when you're bridging the personal and those grand scales. So I'm going to introduce myself again. I'm Mark, and if you're up for it, we're going to review 14 novels by Sonallah Ibrahim on several books. So I'm going to go through the English language novels in the order in which they were published. I don't know the order of the French language publication. I could have looked it up for the video, but considering I'm assuming most of you don't speak French and they're not available in English, it's probably not important. It might be interesting to watch just because I'm showing you something you haven't seen before. Ibrahim is not the widest read figure in the U.S. Where we're going to start is That Smell. Here's That Smell. And That Smell is a story of leaving prison. So Ibrahim was in his 20s, I believe, and he was a outspoken Marxist. And he supported the Egyptian head of state, Nasser. And when Nasser came to power, he did go through at one point and put a lot of Marxists in prison. So this creates a political dynamic that is unusual in literature. And That Smell does contain a section called Notes from Prison. This is translated or published by New Directions. There is another book in here too by New Directions. This is the better book by New Directions. That Smell is the story of I believe he's unnamed narrator, and he is leaving prison. We don't really know the circumstances. We can kind of get a sense that he was a political prisoner. Being a political prisoner is a little different than being just a criminal. Political prisoners know what they did and they believe in it, so they don't always want to fess up in the sense of saying I was wrong, but at the same time they want to make sure that people know this is what they believe. We don't get a lot of... the language is not flowery. Ibrahim is kind of simple sentences, longer paragraphs, typically, not always. And we get a lot of good images in the paragraphs. And those simple sentences convey a personality. In a way, it's almost like Saul Bellow. We see a wealth of interests in the narrators of our stories. We see certain beautifully described things. We see flexibility of intelligence. The characters typically are similar to Ibrahim himself. But at the same time, what that gruffness and roughness of those simple sentences convey, as well as he's not afraid to describe sex. What that really conveys is that something has happened to this guy. We're getting, at the same time, somebody rough and tumble and an effete intellectual. And so that creates an interesting dichotomy in the majority of his narrators. That Smell does not discuss politics directly. We don't get the collages in here. I think the book is only about 60 or 70 pages. What I will say is that when I've been asked, and I'm not asked often, but I have been asked before, to really pin down a personal canon, say a personal list of 20 to 100 books that I would recommend everybody read to be educated. This is typically included in my personal canon. It's a short book. It's probably not the best Ibrahim, but if you've never read him before, it's certainly the most welcoming. It is so short. You can read it in a day, and it's just a really great novel of controversial politics in a part of the world that we in the U.S. don't really get the chance to talk about very often. I don't know a huge amount about Egypt. I know a lot about pyramids. I know some of the ancient history of Egypt. But the view that we get of Egypt and kind of the developing world, so to speak, even though Egypt is fairly developed today, it's unique, and this helps us round out our view of what's going on in different parts of the world. Before I finish up with that smell, what I'm going to say is what I've heard somebody say about Ibrahim before. Typically, when we read post-colonial literature, writers like V.S. Naipaul or Chinua Achebe come to mind. And these writers are often writing about villages. Danny Leferrier in Haiti does not spend all of his time writing about, is it Port-au-Prince is the capital? Typically he's writing about the smaller towns and the villages. Ibrahim doesn't do that. Ibrahim puts us right in the middle of a huge and bustling Cairo. And for most of his books, we are seeing Cairo, and yet the theme that we're talking about is post-colonialism. And for him, it's really a contrast between a traditional way of living, thinking religiously and so forth, and a more modern type of worldview. For Ibrahim specifically, it's Marxism, but it's really not specific to Marxism what he's got going on here and what he's discussing. Now, as I've already praised the book, what I'm going to say is that smell is a 5 out of 5 book. It's kind of an understated narrative. This guy just got out of the city, or just got out of the prison, and he's going around the city. We're seeing a lot of different people who would want to see him, family and such, after getting out of prison. But yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, that smell is great. S-tier novel. Yeah, the one last thing I'll say before we go to the next novel is that I had at one point thought of making a video like my prostitutes video, where I talk about 8 different writers who had affiliation with the sex industry. I was thinking of doing a prison writers video, and I've already reviewed Jean Genet, and I might be stuck talking about people like Dostoevsky and the Marquis de Sade, so I decided against the prison writers video. But this is specifically kind of where I would point that. You really are getting political prisoner fiction. It's a very interesting book. 5 out of 5, S tier. The second book that we're going to look at is called The Committee. And this is The Committee. Now, The Committee is how I was introduced to Ibrahim. And I believe that it might actually be the first of his works that was translated into English. It was made available in 2001. I think it was written in like the 60s or 70s, but I'm not positive. The Committee is basically a retelling of Kafka's Trial. Now, if you're familiar with people like Walter Benjamin and other left-wing theorists who wrote about Kafka, the idea that Kafka was a socialist is probably not foreign to you. That said, the politics of Ibrahim are more in the front than you see with Kafka. Kafka's America has some pretty explicit opinions in it, but it's really not that in your face. It's not really that in your face with The Committee either. I read this book knowing none of the characters or none of the people the committee members refer to. So what happens is our narrator wakes up, he receives a letter that says he has to be judged before a committee. He goes to this committee, and apparently the committee members are stand-ins for real members of Egyptian political life. I don't know them. I'm not going to lie and pretend to be the most well-versed in this writer's history. That said, We don't really need to know it. What we basically have is this story of a guy going before a committee. They're judging him. The committee is very concerned with Arab and Egyptian life, and what ends up happening is that the guy returns home. A committee member follows him and spends time with him as well. We get some discussion of alone time, if you understand what I'm trying to say, for the main character. And then I forget exactly what happens, but we wind up in Cairo, and he basically has a long essay as part of the narrative on the waste that the Coca-Cola company and Coca-Cola sodas and bottles have made in Egypt. And then we've got a really unusual, essentially magical ending. I'm not going to say what it is. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's interested. But The Committee is a solid book. It turned me on to Ibrahim. It's a lot different than all of the other works that I've read by him. There is basically magic in this novel. It's only 180 pages, 165. But this is probably in some ways right on note for his political coming into the novel, his politics. In other ways, it's less political than some of his writing. What I'm going to say is it's a great retelling of Kafka. It introduced me to him, and I loved finding out who he was. So I'm going to rate this as a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and say that it's probably an A tier book. This is a great book if you are looking for something like Kafka. You read Kafka and you want to move on from Kafka, or you're looking for somewhere else to go. The other writer I would feel inclined to mention would be Haruki Murakami. If you're looking for a Marxist Egyptian writing a Murakami style novel, this is where you go. And again, he's explicitly a leftist, so you can like these books without agreeing with the politics. You don't have to agree with everything. You just give it a try is really what I'm saying. If that's not you, if it is you, you're probably going to find a clearer expression of left-wing political belief in fiction in Sonallah Ibrahim than you're going to find many other places. But this is a great book, 4 out of 5, or 4.5 out of 5, A-tier book. It's good if you're looking for something kind of humorous and some magic. The next book that we're going to talk about is called Zaat. Now, this book is it's out of print, and I got a copy when in the past couple years. I enjoyed the book. What's interesting about this book is that the main character is a woman. Most of Sonallah Ibrahim's protagonists are men. Most of them are kind of gritty. I don't want to say that he's like Bukowski, but there's a hint of some of a Bukowski protagonist in Ibrahim. He can be a little piggish sometimes. It's not a huge turnoff. It's not my favorite parts of the books, but it does develop the characters, so it has a reason to be there. This is the first book in English that really has those collage style chapters. And so what we get is each chapter is typically about Zaat, the main character, and she's kind of given a choice where she will either follow a very traditional path and do X, Y, or Z and kind of be a stay-at-home wife and not work and all of this, and then she'll have the choice to do the modern thing, typically Zaat will want to do the modern thing. And then what will happen is, either from listening to somebody or being stuck in a situation, she winds up believing that she's going to live this traditional style life. After beginning the traditional style life, she then has something happen that kind of forces her back into the modern world. And for Ibrahim, the modern world is the city. So again, we're getting kind of we're getting a post-colonial view, but our environment, our setting, is Cairo rather than a village in Trinidad and Tobago. What I was saying about the chapters, and I'm going to try to show this to you. You see this. Each of these paragraphs has some space between it. And that's because each of these paragraphs is something like a newspaper headline. And this here, we have a clear box. And that is noted in my translation as a photograph that was likely from a newspaper. And so we see a few paragraphs, or a few things like that. Now, what we got going on in Zaat is that this very real story about a woman who's trying to be modern and wants to kind of live according to Western mores. And then she's getting shoved back in this very traditional kind of way of life. And what really emphasizes how unique her situation is are those collage chapters. We get discussion of everything from the UN to Cairo metropolitan politics to questions about public transportation, to outside governments giving money to the Egyptian government, and we're getting all of these different things going on. So it really does add texture and a lot of kind of a global awareness to the book. Zaat is good. I am pronouncing the name slightly wrong. It is Z-A-A-T in the English translation. There's a note in the introduction on how it's pronounced, but I couldn't pin that down. But this is not Ibrahim's best work. It's a good book. It's interesting, but it's not quite where his other work is. If you are reading Ibrahim, and if you are going to go out and buy a few books that are out of print, it's definitely worth your time. But as an introduction work, it's not where I would recommend you go. I would give Zaat probably like a 4, a solid 4, or maybe even a little lower, 3.5 out of 5. So let's look at Zaat kind of as a B tier book. It's good, it's interesting. We're getting a lot of interesting stuff about Egypt. Ibrahim really had an idea of what he was doing here. It's just not my favorite, and it is out of print, so it's going to be more difficult to come by. The next book that we're going to look at is one of 2 books that's kind of like this, and it's called Stealth. And Stealth is published by New Direction as well. And this is not an experimental work, really. We're basically getting the story of a young Egyptian boy. I can't remember what his dad's employed in, but a lot of time is spent kind of living a child's life. It's not a very political work in that sense. I'm sure there's probably some stuff I'm missing that if I were keen on Egyptian politics and history, I might know. But in my opinion, this is really sort of lackluster. And there's another book that's very similar to this called Le Petit Voyeur, en français. And I'm going to talk about that book when we get there. That book is not available in English. Stealth is available in English. It's published by New Directions, which is probably the biggest publisher that in this group. Most of these are university press type books. But this is just if you've never read an Egyptian novel, it's worth reading. It's just, if you've never read an Egyptian novel, I would be inclined to tell you to read That Smell. Otherwise, this is kind of just, I don't have much to say about it. I read it. I found it actually kind of slow. It is Ibrahim. He knows what he's doing. But it's just not his best work. So I'm going to give this like a 2.5 out of 5. And we're going to put this as like a C+. So Stealth is good. I don't even know where to begin to try to sell it to you. It's an interesting child life, portrait of a child in a country we might not know very well in the U.S., but it's not, in my opinion, his best. The next book I have is called Beirut, Beirut. Now, the title of Beirut, Beirut appears to be because Ibrahim says that Beirut is kind of two cities in this novel. I'm pretty sure he says on the west and the left is actually the right politically, and on the right or the east is the left politically, for how he describes the city. The city is involved in military conflict when the novel takes place. Our main character in Beirut, Beirut is a video editor, and he's going to be editing, I think it's a documentary for some friends. He's also written a novel, or I'm pretty sure it's a novel, and he's having a really hard time trying to publish this novel. These issues do get kind of resolved toward the end of the novel. I think the publication of Beirut, Beirut may be a little interesting. I'm not positive. A lot of foreign publishers will have involvements from foreign governments. So Dalkey Archive Press, for instance, many people might know them because they make these really great, larger publications of postmodern works. So the newest editions of the Dalkey Archive are typically a red back with like a white strip where the author's name goes. And I have this style of book for an Ishmael read. Yellow back radio broke down, and also my copy of The Saatweed Factor are those Dalkey Archive. Now, Dalkey Archive also publishes the French writer Céline. I've read almost everything Céline wrote, including the pamphlets that you shouldn't read. They're a waste of your time. I mean that quite ardently. When you hear about Céline, you'll hear about how he wrote these 3 anti-Semitic pamphlets, and they're terrible and they're really hard to find in English and all this stuff. I read them in French. They're trash. That said, Céline wrote some really good novels, right? And the Dalkey Archive publishes those novels in English, and they actually get funding from the French government in order to publish those novels. Beirut, Beirut got some funding from Qatar. So we're getting another Middle Eastern country that is saying, yes, please, this is how we want to have people see our part of the world. This is not Ibrahim's best work. I believe it is still published, but again, it might not be. I would probably say that this is like a 4 out of 5. This is like a solid B novel. It's a little longer than those first few, but it's definitely interesting. when you read a couple of Ibrahim's works, it's not that they try to start to blend together, but he has a project that he's doing. And so the same as with Saul Bellow or Kathy Acker, you know, novels may seem to sort of blend together almost, or characters. The same thing happens. Beirut is a good book. It's just not the best. 4 out of 5 stars. Looking at like a B tier book. Our next book is a historical fiction novel, and it's quite a book. This is Warda, and Warda is the story of a young woman revolutionary in, I believe it's like the 50s, yeah. And what she goes about doing is she essentially goes out and builds political consciousness to for tribes of people in the Middle East before these tribes had kind of been broader culturally assimilated. She's going out and building that awareness. The novel talks about her time with these different tribes, and it also talks about time at like university. The book is written sort of as like a diary. I don't know if you can see there, but this is just dates. Most of Ibrahim's work is first person, and this is obviously no different, because it is like a journal of sorts. This is not my favorite. This is not my favorite. It's not my favorite of his books. That said, if you're the kind of person who likes the story of Che Guevara and his consciousness building, his political consciousness building, his political activities, how he got started, and kind of what he did. There have been some great movies about Che. This is kind of the novel for you. There's in the city near here. It's not super close, but it's near here. There is an anarchist bookstore, and I remember I had to get my copy of this book offline. I couldn't find it anywhere. A couple months ago, or now it's probably close to a year, I went to this bookstore for the first time since I was in my, you know, I was in college, and I'm almost 40 now, and I found a copy of Warda in their Arabic literature section, and it made me so happy. One thing I want to say is, as I said, Ibrahim was an avowed Marxist. He went to prison for it. When he got out of prison, he stayed a Marxist. He was serious about his political conviction. I was just flipping through the book and randomly saw the sentence about halfway down the page that reads, and I quote, "Marx designated 4 modes of production that have defined human history, namely primitive communism, antique or ancient production, feudalism, and capitalism." So, as I said, he was a Marxist, but like he's serious about it, and he made it part of his artistic project. Varda is a great book. I think in some ways it's more valuable than it might be entertaining. I didn't find the book super entertaining, but it was interesting the whole way through. There's a very... sometimes you want Ibrahim, or the translator maybe, to be little more flowery. This is a very tough book. Simple sentences and so forth, kind of gruff. But it's an interesting book. Let's give this Let's give this a 4 out of 5, or a 4.5 out of 5, and say it's an A tier novel. The next book that we're going to talk about is probably the book that I would say is the most interesting for the kind of person I assume might be interested in Ibrahim. And that book is Ice. I thought this was a great novel, number one. I just want to throw that out there. Ibrahim really is a top, is a favorite-ish writer for me. He's definitely not my top number one. Might not be in my top 5, but he's probably my top 10. But Ice is, as I said, he's an avowed Marxist, but in reality, Ibrahim went to the USSR to study filmmaking at a certain point in his college education, I believe it was. This is basically the novelization of that time there. And what's so interesting about this book is that he really doesn't seem to like the USSR much at all. So that was essentially the largest communist government, to my knowledge, that ever existed. And Ibrahim is a Marxist, and yet he basically doesn't like the government. And he points out a number of specific things that he sees as kind of shortcomings of their government. It's everything from the way that they handle education. There's some issues with money beyond what you might typically hear about. The society itself doesn't seem spectacularly different from Egypt when he's writing about it, and that's not because it's a flaw in his writing. It's because it hasn't worked to ameliorate all of the problems in the world to live under this form of government, even for the people that support it. And so that's kind of what is interesting about this. This is like a very hardcore Marxist, went to prison for his political beliefs, came out, wrote books about how he still believed those things. And he doesn't like the USSR. So take that for what it's worth. This is a part of this channel we wouldn't typically talk about. I really don't want to talk about politics. I'm sure you've seen the Marx that's on my bookshelf. I've got a number of books by Marxists, but I don't particularly like calling myself a Marxist. I'm not one. But I find it interesting. And yeah, we get a real dissatisfaction with that style of government. Now, aside from that, we get a lot of typical kind of stuff that we would associate with a college novel, except granted, our narrator is a little older. It's like, this is like the post-grad or the post undergrad, the master's level college novel that no one's ever heard of. We get discussions of drinking, smoking. We get the main character's a male. He definitely has sexual encounters. There are not a lot of sexual scenes. Some of the stuff gets a little gruff here and there. They talk in a way that's kind of forward, but we're really not getting specific scenes. Lots of sex. It's just that it does happen, granted off camera. I'm going to say this is a 4.5 out of 5 and an A tier novel as well. That's Ice. Our next novel is The Turban and the Hat. And this is another historical fiction. And it's a very heavily researched historical fiction. What we get in The Turban and the Hat is more reliance on newspapers and such. It's just the newspapers that Ibrahim is referencing and the texts that he's borrowing from to fill in things are from like 1750 or whatever it was. It's not 1750, gosh, I feel stupid. I'll tell you. No, it's 1798, so I wasn't too far off. I should know this better, but the real story, the crux of the story, is French involvement in Egypt and the beginning of their occupation in Egypt, and that was done with Napoleon. If you look at my copy of the book, that's a painting of Napoleon. So, what is our story? Our story is an Egyptian guy who has become a scholar. And he starts an affair with Napoleon's mistress. This does have sex scenes in it. It doesn't have a lot of them. It's got a few, though. I really like this book. When I read stuff, for some reason I have like an aversion to the 17th century. I mean, I'll read plays and theater from 1650 to 1699 all the time. And I love me some Dostoevsky and some Flaubert and Balzac. And, yeah, but if you ask me for stuff that I've read from the 17th century, it's not absent, but it's mostly philosophy. And, I can't give you a whole lot of recommendations from that. What I was going to say is that I don't typically like stuff that ham-fistedly reaches into the past, and for some reason it seems like the further back most of the fictional encounters with the world that I've had work is that peculiarities of speech are emphasized, and the world doesn't seem very modern. You know, that things are antiquated is heightened and accentuated, and that is not at all the case with this. The book is written with as if it's diaries. You got the Wednesday, 27th of March is basically a chapter. I forget if the narrator is writing a journal or not. But what I'm getting at here is that this is actually kind of a gritty book. It's not so much that you're getting like Charles Bukowski drunk at the bar, or the addiction you see in Hubert Selby Jr., but there's just such a gruffness in Ibrahim's character, like a bristliness, and it leads its way to these kind of really disaffected intellectuals. They tend to be very strongly convicted, principled figures, but they're not always the nicest. And you get that here, and when it really comes in for me, and what I want to say is the sex scenes in that. When Ibrahim writes sex, he doesn't do flowery at all. He doesn't even try. And so oftentimes it can be sort of a gruffness to the act, and we do see that there. The Turban and the Hat, that said, is a book by him that I love. And I'm going to give that probably a 5 out of 5 and an S-tier book. And I say that because I also think there is a chance that, if I recommend it right, the one or two people who've stuck around this long with the video will actually go out and read it. The last book I have in English, the last one to come out in translation to my knowledge, is 1970, The Last Days. This book is a historical fiction novel, and the thing that's really unique about this is that the narrator of the book is Egypt's Nasser. and this is the last period of his life. I can't remember how long it is. It's not really important. This is probably going to be pretty controversial for some people. There are some things depicted in the Middle East that the Middle East is not a land of peace in contemporary history. So there are. This is Egypt. This is Nasser. Nasser had political aspirations, and even this writer was put in prison by him. The United States, if you're from the U.S., did not agree with everything that he said and did. So there's some pretty controversial war stuff in this book. But other than that, what I'd be most likely to compare this to is two Gabriel Garcia Marquez books. Now, this is realist. This is a historical fiction novel. It does have his chapters also, where you get the clippings and the collages from the newspapers. But what I'd be most likely to compare this to is The Autumn of the Patriarch, and then I would say it's even more like The General and His Labyrinth. Now, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is not Ibrahim's best book. So, that said, it's pretty good. I would probably give this like a 4 out of 5 and give it an A rating. Now, I said I had 4 other books by him. And I'm not going to go through trying to sell you on these books the same way. This video's gone a bit longer than I wanted it to. I was hoping I might be able to get one in and do all these guys under 40 minutes or something. And it looks like I'm probably pushing 50 right now. The last 4 books, I'm not going to bother finding the right order for. I'm just going to start with Amerikanli. Amerikanli is basically a novel about when Ibrahim was a history professor in, I think it's San Diego. I don't know, where's the big college in like kind of Southern California, that area? Is that Berkeley? He was at that college. The thing about this book, and probably the reason why it's not available in English, is because he's not exactly gushing over the U.S. He's a Marxist. He seems happy to live there, but he doesn't have any romantic misgivings about the United States. When he describes people kind of going about the city, it does not have the sort of hug that capitalist culture gives us in the United States. If you're like me, you might have very positive associations with 7-Eleven. I love 7-Eleven, good hot dogs. When I walk into 7-Eleven, I always feel almost like I'm at home. It might not be the nicest place to buy or whatever, but it's, 7-Eleven is 7-Eleven. It's a nice convenience store. You don't get that sense of that inclusivity or that hominess to a lot of the character wandering around the street. The U.S. feels sort of alienating. And then on top of that, this was written in the 90s. Most of what he talks about regarding the U.S. that I can remember is he talks about Noam Chomsky, he talks about Howard Zinn, he talks about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, and he talks about the David Mamet movie, Wag the Dog. It's a great movie if you've never seen it. Not everybody loves David Mamet, but I think David Mamet is incredible. If you get the chance, you should see Glengarry Glen Ross. But it's a solid book. I'm not going to bother rating it because it's French. I did like it, but it's not. It's about as good as Beirut. The next book I'm going to talk about is Le Petit Voyeur. Le Petit Voyeur is like Stealth. It's a very similar novel. There are some spicy political takes in this, though. Not a lot of them, but like 1 or 2. The adults in the room are talking about around the kid, and you're like, wow, that probably wouldn't make it in an English novel today. It's it's like the way that he describes women sometimes. He's got kind of a gruff man's sort of attitude, and he could have been writing in the 70s with some of the books, and you're like, wow, that's not really totally up today's PC culture. That said, the book really isn't that great. I would probably give this a C. This is like a 2.5. Etoile, though, Star of August. I do wish this was available in English. I would actually like to recommend this to people. The main character is a journalist. He's kind of doing stories about construction in Cairo. He talks about Nasser, and there's kind of a sense when he's talking about Nasser, he also talks about pharaohs at one point. And he talks about how crazy it is that a singular man, just one dude, you know, it might be a famous dude, it might be a president or a pharaoh, but it's still just a dude, can say, build that, and it essentially moves heaven and earth. The entire city will go and construct this. And so we get meditations on here kind of on that maximalist aspect of governing, is what I would say. In addition to all of the typical kind of harumphing about an overly bureaucratic culture and alienated work and good old left-wing stuff. Now, the last book is Charaf, or Ulaner, and this won in 1998 an award in Cairo for the best novel. This is another one I really wish that I could give to my friend, just as a hey, check this out. So this is a world of there are a lot of cultural differences between the kinds of people who Ibrahim typically writes about and me, for instance. So the world that he's writing about, honor killings are a thing. So you have to take a moment to grapple with that. And basically what Charaf, which means the word honor, what happens in here is that he runs into, I think it's an American, and the American essentially figures out that the guy is bored and takes him back to his apartment. He figures, we'll go party or whatever. While they're at the apartment, the American, makes a pass at Charaf, and he tries to hit on him, and Charaf kills him. And this is basically the story of Charaf going to prison and the way that he's treated, the way that other people who have committed honor killings are treated, because it's not as bad as certain other inmates. It's very clear when you... sorry about any change to view there. My camera just decided that I had reached the max amount of time that it was going to let me film one continuous go. So here we are with Charaf, or Charaf. Ulaner. He gets treated differently in prison. Not radically differently, but there are some things that are different. It's very clear from this book that Ibrahim has been in prison. Most of the book does feel like Ibrahim was really writing about his experience in prison and using that as kind of the structure of this story about this guy who killed somebody and how he's treated differently. Now, toward the end of the book, there's a political prisoner, somebody who was in government. I think he's a doctor of some sort. It uses that time to really talk about that guy's involvement with money is Ibrahim's time to reflect on more like conventionally left issues. The book really is, when it comes down to it, kind of a meditation on why honor killing is wrong, that there is no problem in society with gay people existing, and that big companies are kind of out to get you because, after all, he's a Marxist. I know that kind of seems like it comes out of nowhere, but it's kind of built up around this other interesting character in the prison who is a very unconventional political prisoner. What I would say of Charaf is that that's an S-tier book, but it's in French, and if you can read it, or if it ever gets published in English, go read it. If you can read it, I recommend it. My copy, one thing I love about getting used books is that my copy is from a high school. So that might tell you about the kind of graphicness of the book. It's not too in your face. It's just some time in prison. All right. So what I said in the beginning and where I am with this is, again, most of what we're dealing with Ibrahim is questions of left-wing thought. He's concerned with history and politics, and what I'll probably name this video is Must Historical Fiction Be Left-Wing, or something like that. If you guys have any other, writers who you think are cool to hear about, from parts in Africa or the Middle East. I'm also open to Asia and want to make recommendations. Go for it, because I think political writers are interesting when they're like Ibrahim. All right, that's been everything. I appreciate you guys. I'll reiterate, if you could like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Okay. Several books out. Bye-bye.